bugs and chase me, but only for fun, only to see me scream and run around and go, Mom, Mom, right? So the one thing that I was the most terrified of is the most ridiculous one of the things that they chased me around with to be terrified of. And once I, grew up and realized that I was afraid of nothing, were those cicada shells. The ones that are left behind after the cicada emerges. I guess they have like some kind of 17-year cycle or something. And so they would end up on like the bark of trees or like hanging onto a vine on the house. And then they're hideous looking. They're really, really ugly. So they had a big ick factor in my book. So they had like these empty sockets where the eyes should be. And they had these like 6 like claws that's the reason that they were holding on, even though, the shell was all that was left behind. Now that I'm grown up a little bit, and I've seen some of these up close, whereas I, avoided them before, I've noticed a few other things about cicada shells. And one thing is that it's one of those natural miracles that God provides in our world. That this shell is evidence that new life has emerged. This ugly-looking exoskeleton that's left behind isn't a dead bug. In fact, it's not any more dead. I mean, your skin cells are dead, right? But they flake off your body, and you're not dead, right? So it's just left behind. It's just a shell. But the other thing I noticed is there's a slit down the back of these empty shells. And that is where a live creature has escaped a prison which it is outgrowing, right? So new legs, new eyes, new wings all came up out of that shell and took flight. And so for the rest of the summer, in those hot, hot days at the end of summer, high up in the trees, you hear the buzzing song of the cicadas. Sometimes it's so loud, I have to turn up my TV. Does that ever happen to you? The cicadas can get so loud, but they cannot help but singing, because that is the song of their life. That is the song that they are living, that they have been given that life to begin with. I'll bet that not a single one of those cicadas I've ever heard up singing high in the tree could ever tell you where they left their clothes behind. They didn't remember which tree it was, and they didn't look for landmarks because they didn't need it anymore. Their clothes are no longer needed. Well, that's all the disciples saw, wasn't it? When they got to the tomb, all they saw were 2 piles of clothes sitting there in a tomb that was otherwise empty. Actually, Mary saw less. Mary was so frightened by the fact that the tomb was open that she didn't even look in the first time. Her heart fell to her stomach, the blood drained out of her face, and she wondered, was this grave robbers? She didn't even know what to think, so she ran back to tell the disciples and managed to wake up 2 of them, Simon Peter and one who's not named. They run back. They beat her back. I don't think it's because Mary doesn't have running legs. I think that she is struggling with the weight of the situation. She does not know what to think of what she has seen. So the disciples race. Simon Peter makes it back first, but the other one ends up walking into the tomb first. And they find these 2 piles of clothes. And what's even weirder is one of them is all rolled up neatly. The one that had been wrapped around Jesus' head is rolled up neatly and placed in a separate pile than the other ones. This is not the MO of a grave robber. Because, well, I watch enough crime situations and read enough crime novels to know if there's a rug on the floor and a dead body, you roll it up because it's easier to carry dead weight when you have limbs flailing, right? They don't know yet that there wasn't a body to remove. They don't know what happened behind that closed tomb. That was just between God and Jesus. Why would someone who was robbing a body not only remove the cloth so make it easier for them to carry him, and not only that, fold them neatly or roll them up and have two different piles. It doesn't make any sense. Now, the disciples, at least Simon Peter at first, it says in the gospel, he believes. We're not sure what he believes because it goes on to say they don't yet understand what Jesus meant by the fact that he would rise from the dead. So he believes something has happened. We're not sure that he knows yet what exactly happened. But the rest of this story, actually the real, I think, Easter moment belongs to Mary. Mary is greeted by angels, two of them, where Jesus' head and foot would have been if he'd still been in the tomb. And eventually, she also encounters her risen Lord. He must have new clothes on, because somebody took his other clothes off. And someone once mentioned to me, is that the naked Jesus that she met in the garden? Well, folks, for the sake of argument, let's say he found the gardener's old overalls and put them on, and that's why Mary mistook him for the gardener. But we will be newly clothed in the resurrection. And I think that our resurrected bodies, we're not quite exactly sure what that's going to look like. But however it is, it didn't shock Mary so much that Jesus was there or what he was wearing, but that he was. Because as far as she was concerned, he was gone. So what kind of evidence do we really have? We have a vacant tomb. We have piles of used clothing. No wonder Mary felt a sense of absence, of vacancy. No wonder she fell to her knees in grief and was just consumed by feeling utterly and completely alone. If you've ever lost someone you love, you know where she is because you think there's just no way that person can be replaced in my life. And so, in the midst of her grief, she sits. So for a moment here, let's just consider what a fragile beginning. What a fragile beginning to a religion that has now lasted for 2,000 years, and millions of people have come to follow Christ because of this pivotal story, this pivotal moment in our history on this flimsy evidence. The resurrection doesn't square with anything we understand about what it means to be a physical human being on earth. There is no tangible evidence. That's why we go searching for the Shroud of Turin. That's why we go searching for evidence in this place and that and all these archaeological finds. But no one saw it happen. No one saw what happened when death turned back to life. No one knows. No one saw it on Easter, and no one who lives today has seen it physically happen. In fact, it's so strange that this is the only event in Jesus' life of which we're aware that is only between Jesus and God. Because almost all of the other stories we know about, there were other people there. Even if there was only one or two other people, we hear that, Moses and Elijah appeared on the mountaintop with Jesus, right? We hear about these special moments. But the resurrection, that was behind closed doors. God and Jesus, only they know what happened that day. There were no witnesses. No one can say what happened or when it happened. Can you tell I love a crime novel? No one was there. And everybody arrived after the fact. All we have are clothes, and in Mary's case, angels. And in the case of the other 10 disciples, they have nothing. They didn't even wake up when Mary came to get them. I'm going to tell you today that it doesn't matter. It does not matter the lack of evidence, because the empty tomb is not the point of Easter. It is not the point of the resurrection. The tomb was a cicada shell. Jesus outgrew death. God gave him back life. The living being from within the tomb was gone because He outgrew the tomb. The tomb was not big enough for the message of the resurrection. It was way too small. And can you imagine every Christian on earth needing to go visit a tomb because that's where it happened? There wouldn't be enough. That would be like the Muslims in Mecca. It would be a crazy, crazy kind of pilgrimage trip. The thing is, we don't worship the tomb. We worship the resurrected Christ because Jesus wasn't there, and he isn't there anymore. The risen one, he had people to see. He had things to do. He had business among the living. He couldn't have his business among the living if he stayed in the tomb to wait to see who was going to find him first. In fact, his business among the living, he got busy. After he saw Mary 4 more times in the Gospel of John, he sees the disciples. And with every single visit, his followers, they get stronger. They get wiser. They become kinder. And they get more and more courageous and daring for the sake of the good news. They become, in short, more like him. And that's why we call them the first Christians, because they were becoming as Christ-like as they could be. So Easter begins the moment the gardener says, Mary. And she knew and she saw who he was. That miracle, it happened and it keeps on happening because Jesus is not in the tomb. The risen Christ is encountering us in the world, and we encounter him every time he comes to us, every time he reveals to us one more way in which we are called to serve him by serving others. We believe not because of evidence or lack thereof, but we believe because he lives. We live. We believe because, surprise, surprise, we're not alone. That's what Mary found. She thought she was alone in the garden. Jesus was right there. You will never know where Jesus will turn up next, and that is the ongoing resurrection miracle. So if there's a phrase I have to sum up the moral of the story today, it's that don't get so focused on the empty tomb that you forget to speak to the gardener. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.